Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're decoding the absolute urban chaos of New York City. We're going to take a pretty wild ride, zooming all the way out from the daily, on-the-ground experience of a single pedestrian right up to the incredibly complex machine learning models that are quietly running the entire metropolis. Let's get right into it.
So before we get to the algorithms, we really need to start small. Have you ever felt totally overwhelmed, just completely lost in a massive sea of people on a busy city sidewalk? Think back to a time when you were trying to navigate a huge crowd, dodging elbows, trying to figure out which way the tide of humanity was actually shifting. That overwhelming, kind of claustrophobic feeling, that's our micro-level starting point for today.
Here's our roadmap for today. First, surviving the human tide. Second, the Times Square paradox. Third, measuring the chaos. Fourth, enter artificial intelligence. And finally, number 5, ethics in the machine.
Okay, Section 1, surviving the human tide. Before we look at the city as a massive network, we have to look at the individual experience. We instinctively use a ton of everyday tactics just to maintain our sanity in these dense crowds, right? We pull up mapping apps to actively avoid peak congestion. We plan our visits for off-peak hours, like super early in the morning. And when the rush gets to be just too much, we physically regulate ourselves, maybe some deep breathing or deliberately seeking out quiet little sanctuaries like the High Line. Oh, and perhaps the most common modern tactic of all? Throwing on a pair of headphones to create an immediate mental space barrier against the noise of the city.
Moving on to Section 2, the Times Square paradox.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really understand how crowds and traffic move at a macro level, we need to talk about this absolutely fascinating game theory concept called Braze's paradox. It states that adding a road to a network can actually increase traffic congestion, while removing a road can decrease it. It's essentially the prisoner's dilemma applied to urban planning. See, individual drivers act selfishly to find the absolute shortest route, but those collective, selfish choices end up creating a Nash equilibrium of unwanted traffic for everyone. Everyone tries to take that brilliant new shortcut, and suddenly, that shortcut is literally just a parking lot.
For decades, the old strategy was super simple and, well, seemingly logical. Add a road, and you assume you get less traffic. But in reality, you get more. The new strategy flips this entirely on its head. If you remove a road, you can actually achieve less traffic. No way, right? But it's true. By restricting the options, you essentially force the entire network to distribute itself way more efficiently.
And we actually have spectacular real-world proof of this in action. Back in 2009, New York City made the highly controversial decision to close Times Square to cars, converting this massive, chaotic intersection into a pedestrian plaza. The result? 17%. Despite all the absolute panic from cab drivers everywhere, closing that major intersection did not create gridlock. Because of Braze's paradox, northbound taxi travel times actually improved by 17%. By removing a major road, the whole network breathed easier and traffic disflowed significantly better. Which brings us to Section 3, measuring the chaos.
So, how does a city actually wrap its head around all this chaotic movement? How do urban planners know what to close and what to open? Well, it all starts with meticulous logging and observation, like the 2006 New York City Pedestrian Level of Service Study, Phase 1. The city isn't just guessing at crowd dynamics here. They are actively studying the chaos of the streets down to the very last detail. The city essentially treats pedestrians as nodes in a giant mathematical network. They measure some really specific, highly detailed variables to understand the flow. They look at platooning, which is just a fancy way of saying how people bunch together as they walk. They measure directional flow, precise pedestrian speeds, the exact amount of usable sidewalk space minus any physical obstacles, and even how land use and local amenities affect where people choose to walk. Literally every single pedestrian movement is transformed into a data point in this massive urban equation.
Section 4, enter artificial intelligence.
So, we've moved from the sidewalk to the macro level. But that raises a huge question. How does a city process massive amounts of complex data when human analysts just aren't enough anymore? When your spreadsheets have millions of rows and variables are shifting in real time, classical programming completely hits a wall. And that is exactly when we have to turn to machine learning. To handle that massive transition, we rely on the iterative AI lifecycle. This cycle really anchors the highly abstract concept of artificial intelligence into a concrete, repeatable process. Machine learning isn't magic. It's just a structured way of writing software by feeding a computer examples so it can learn on its own. There are 4 key stages to this life cycle. Step 1 is problem formulation, where you define exactly what success looks like. Step 2 is data collection and processing. Step 3 is model selection and building. And Step 4 is deployment and monitoring. Now, I really want to emphasize Step 2 here. Data collection and processing is often the most time-consuming part of the whole shebang, and it usually determines the absolute success or failure of a project. If your data is messy, incomplete, or flawed, well, your AI model is going to fail regardless of how sophisticated the math happens to be in Step 3.
Finally, Section 5. Ethics in the machine.
This brings us to a really critical vulnerability in our data, bridging the gap between high-tech machine learning and the real-world human stakes for the people actually walking those city sidewalks. The famous statistician George Box once said, "All models are wrong, but some are useful." AI models are simply mathematical assumptions. They're based on human decisions and quite often flawed historical data. They are not objective arbiters of absolute truth. They're human tools, and they reflect the exact information that we feed into them.
Now, you might be wondering, what's the catch? Well, one of the biggest vulnerabilities in these models is the danger of proxies. A proxy is basically when an inaccurate substitute is used for a missing data point, and that can cause systems to fail or even discriminate. Think about it. If an algorithm needs to determine a person's risk factor, it might not have perfect, complete data. So what does it do? It substitutes an available metric, a proxy, that seems, close enough. But the problem is, those proxies often carry some really deep hidden historical baggage. A really stark example of this historical baggage can be found in the 1938 redlining maps of New York City. Historically, redlining was the practice of outlining certain neighborhoods on a map to indicate where services or mortgages should just flat out be denied. Today, a modern algorithm might be programmed to be completely blind to demographics. However, it might still heavily weigh a seemingly innocent data point, like a zip code. But because of the lingering effects of redlining, that zip code often serves as a proxy. So a modern algorithm can inadvertently recreate historical discrimination simply by optimizing for a flawed proxy. So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is this. Achieving true fairness means evaluating the whole system and its actual impact on communities, not just adjusting technical code. We can't just tweak a mathematical formula and call it fair. We have to evaluate the humans in the loop, the historical context of the data, and, most importantly, the real-world outcomes that these systems force upon people.
So, I'll leave you with this final thought to ponder. Are the algorithms running our cities capturing our best traits and actually optimizing our future? Or are they just reflecting our historical flaws? As we navigate the human tide of the modern metropolis, it's a question we absolutely must answer if we want to build a better city. Thanks for tuning into this explainer, and remember, always keep questioning the systems around you.